Welcome to my sweatshort tutorial. So there's two styles in this pattern, the high-waisted and then the medium-waisted. And then there's also the 3-inch inseam and then the 5-inch inseam. They're sewn the exact same way. So regardless of how you cut them, you're going to sew them the exact same way. So one note about sizing is whatever fabric you're using, I'm using a bamboo cotton fleece. This is only a two-way stretch, so it doesn't stretch widthwise. If your fabric doesn't stretch widthwise, I would go and you're kind of in between sizes, choose the one that fits your hip, and then you can always cut your elastic smaller. So we're going to have our two pocket bags. These are identical pieces, so they don't really have a top or a bottom. So if your fabric has a print, keep that in mind. And then we have our two fronts and our two backs and our two ribbing pieces. So the ribbing I use is a pretty lightweight bamboo cotton that stretches a lot, as you can see. If you're using a heavier weight ribbing, you might want to add a couple inches. So we're going to be stretching this pocket band onto the angled side of our front. So you just want to make sure that it reaches the top and then the bottom with some stretch. You don't want to cut it the exact same length or your pocket will be overstretched. And then you don't want it to be too small or it's going to be hard to get into your pocket. So sometimes I don't even use the full length of my ribbing. Sometimes I'll even have an inch left off. When I serge it on, I'm just stretching it on a little bit as I go. So this is really just an estimated length. And I'm using a 1.5 inch wide elastic. If you are using 1 inch elastic, just cut off that 1/2 inch at the top. And then if you're using a wider elastic, if you want to use a 3-inch wide elastic, add an extra 1.5 inches. So whatever the difference is from the 1.5 inches, you're going to either subtract or add. There is a size chart on the instructions that will tell you the length of the elastic that you need. However, you can just adapt it to your size and the size that you are making. You just want to make sure that you don't cut the elastic bigger than the waistline on the pattern. We're going to start by serging two edges of our pocket bag. Just make sure that you are serging the opposite edges on each one. So if I'm going to serge this side and then the bottom, make sure that you serge the same way on your other side. So because I serged this side, I'm going to be serging this side now. You want to make sure that whichever short side you choose as a bottom, you're going to serge one on the left and then one on the right. Otherwise, you'll have the same side pocket. Now we're going to serge on our pocket band. So serging that onto the angled edge of your short front. We're going to start by overhanging it a little bit. So just about a 1/2 inch. And this will just give us enough room when we turn it, because if I were to sew it right at this edge, we don't have quite enough to top stitch on. So overlap it just by 1/2 inch. And then when you get a few stitches in, start by pulling this slightly, not too much. You don't want too much. You don't want to squish it in too much. Your pocket's gonna be hard to get into, just slightly. And you can see I didn't use my entire pocket band. That's why I don't pin it at the top and the bottom, because I might not need the whole thing. And then repeating that with the other side as well. So at the top, we'll just overlap it 1/2 inch again. Now we're going to give our pocket bags a quick press. When we serge, we naturally stretch our fabric, so it's good to use steam to help shrink that back to shape. And then we're going to shrink our pocket band. So now I'm going to top stitch down that pocket bag. I'm using a slightly longer stitch. So on my industrial, I'm using a stitch length 3. And then you want to make sure that you're not going too far away from this seam or you won't catch your seam allowance. So I like to use the edge of my foot, which is about 1/4 inch, which is the width of our serge. And I'm pulling slightly when I'm doing this because I am using a straight stitch. You can also use a single chain stitch or a zigzag stitch. Now I'm going to give this a quick press to shrink this back to shape where I just top stitched. So flipping it over and pressing from the bottom side with tons of steam. And then we'll be placing our pocket bags on afterwards. So now that I've given that a press, you can see that it's now laying flat. So with your piece wrong sides up, you're gonna grab your pocket bag and you're gonna lay the right side of your fabric onto the wrong side of your fabric. Now make sure you're grabbing the right pocket bag. This is not the right one because I need the serging on the other side. This side is going to be serged into your side seam, so that's why we don't need to pre-serge it. So your pocket bag is going to line up to the top of your front and the side of your front. And then you just want to make sure that this is straight alongside your center front line right here. This is a straight line, so you just want to make sure that you have the same width going all the way down. Sometimes it can hang over a little bit at the bottom because of that, and that is totally fine. You're just going to trim it off when you serge the side seams closed. So then we're going to pin that on. You also want to make sure that the bottom edge is straight. So mine is slightly wonky, so I'm going to want to pull that to straighten that out. And now we're going to stitch right in the middle of our serge. So it's about 1/8 from either side of that serge. And again, I'm using a stitch length 3. You don't need to stretch this on, and you can use a straight stitch for this. When you get to that corner, just keep your needle down and then you can pivot and keep sewing. So a good tip to help keep your edge stitching straight is to actually mark, I'll show you on my foot, is to actually mark with Sharpie right in the middle of each side of the foot. And that is a good 1/8 from the side of your foot. So it helps keep your edge stitching straight. And I'm just going to repeat that with the other side as well. And when you're lining up the other side, you want to make sure that it's the same width away from the front as your other one. It doesn't have to be exact, but just eyeballing it so it's the same distance. So now we're just going to press our pocket after we sewed it. So from the wrong side of the fabric, just giving that a quick steam. And then if you flip it over, just quickly checking to make sure that your top stitching is straight. If you're unhappy with it, now is the time to unpick and redo it. Now we're going to sew each side of our short into little tubes. So we're going to finish the side seam and the inseam. Since this is a raw hem, you're going to be leaving a serging tail at least 3 inches long at the bottom. No need to leave it at the top, just at the bottom, because we're going to use a darning needle or hook tool to thread our serge back in. So we're doing that for the side seam and the inseam. And you want to make sure that your pocket isn't flipping down. Make sure that it's laying nice and flat when you complete your side seam. So using a darning needle or a hook needle, if you've done this before, you know your favorite tool. Usually everybody does have a darning needle, comes in the packs of hand needles. What we're gonna do is thread our needle right through those two seams. So we have those two layers of fabric that we laid together in serge. You're going right through both of those layers. And we're just poking under about 1 inch and then going back out. Now I just take my tail and I push it through the eye of the needle, and you'll see some pops up, and then you can just easily grab that and pull it through. There's no need to thread it. No need to get out your glasses and thread it through. You can just poke it up and then pull the tail through. And then once that tail is pulled through, you pull the needle back through your serge and then clip off the excess tail. And then you'll repeat that for the other tails as well. So again, poking right through those two layers, going up about 1 inch, pushing our tail through the eye of the needle, and then pulling our needle back through. Sometimes it does like to get caught, and then you just go back and forth and it'll come through. You don't want to pull too hard or it might snap. And if you do forget to leave your tail and you end up clipping it, just lift your needle and go back over top of your serge about 1 inch and then leave that tail. I do that all the time. Now with your two sides sewn together, I've just given my side seam and inseam a quick press with the iron. Now I'm going to flip one side right side out and place that side inside the other side of the short. So I'm matching my inseam. One good tip is to flip your seam allowances in opposite directions to reduce the bulk. And then I like to clip it at the end. And then I don't need to clip it where I start because that's where I'm starting. And I'm just serging the entire center seam together from center back to center front. So with your shorts still folded on each other, just give that inseam a good press before top stitching. And then we're going to unfold them. And I keep them wrong sides out as I top stitch, as it's easier. Pushing your seam allowance to one side, it does not matter which side you press it to. And then we're following along the crotch seam for the width of our top stitch. Again, I just use the width of my foot, making sure that you're not going too far away because we want to catch our seam allowance. And I do not stretch this as I go, and I do use a straight stitch. So while you're still at your machine, you can get your elastic and overlap the ends about 1/4 inch. And then we're just going to sew right through that overlap a few times. So now that we just top stitched, we want to give that a press as well. I like to use a ham. If you don't have a ham, you can do it right on your iron. but going from the wrong side of your fabric and giving that seam a good press with some steam. Now we're going to draw the marks onto our waistband elastic. So I like to make a mark right beside my overlap. I'm using a Sharpie because this elastic will not be seen. You can use a permanent marker. You can also use chalk or a erasable pen, whatever you're comfortable with. So because the front of our body is naturally bigger than the sway of our backs do divot in a little bit, we need to let more elastic in the front to account for that. So I offset my side seam just about an inch, and those are my two side seams. Now pinching those side seams together, in the middle of where that folds is now our center back, and then where it folds on the other side is our center front. So just in case you don't lose it, you can also say center back, just so you know. So now we get to pin on our elastic. The first thing I do is make sure that my pockets are laying flat, and I give it a pin there. And on the other side as well. Now you can make sure that your pockets are the same width, so it matches there, so I know that I can pin there. Now we are pinning our elastic to the wrong side of our fabric. So knowing that this is my center back, I'm going to pin this mark. Make sure that I'm not pinning it to where the top stitch is, but I'm pinning it to where that seam is, because that is my center back. And then I pin it on the right side of the fabric because I'm going to be serging it on this way. And then just lining up those other notches to my side seams and my center front. Just a rule of thumb, your side seams should face the back. Now you can start wherever on your waistband. I do like to start between my center back and one of my side seams, pulling it so you know that it lays flat, and then I just pinch it somewhere in the middle. With your serging feet up, or serging needles up, we're gonna sew a few stitches first. And then with your needles down, you can start stretching this in. So you wanna make sure that you're not stretching too much where you're stretching your body. All we're doing is stretching our fabric enough so it lays flat on our elastic. And then we're just following the edge of our elastic and the top of our shorts. We're not trimming any off. And then when you get to where you started, you're just gonna overlap your serge. And then with your needles up, lifting your foot and tailing off. Now giving that waistband a good press with lots of steam. So this step is optional, but if you would like to do a drawstring, we're gonna put in our grommets now. So I like to do this step after my elastic, so I know where the middle of my waistband is. If we were to do this before, sometimes it just shifts when you serge onto your elastic. So taking a chalk or erasable pen, these are the friction pens, so they're removed by friction, so the iron. These also sell on Amazon and Staples, and they are wonderful. I use them for pretty much everything. We're gonna start by flipping our waistband over. We're putting our grommets on our front, so make sure that you're doing this on your front. Flipping your waistband over, and then marking where that waistband ends, marking the bottom of the waistband, and then just marking where the top of your waistband is. So just naturally where that elastic hits. Now we know that this is the top and this is the bottom of our waistband. So we want to make a mark right in the middle of that. It's really helpful to have a ham to lay this on so everything lays flat. And then using a ruler, I like to do my grommets 1 inch away from that center seam. So I know that this is my center seam. You can double check by going underneath or marking this side of our serge. And marking it 1 inch away from that on both sides. And now we're just going to make sure that it's in the middle of that 1 inch mark. So our grommets are going to hit here and here. So you definitely want to fuse them before you put your grommets on, just to help with the stability of the fabric. Yes, your marks are going to disappear, and that is okay because we're going to mark the same thing on the other side of the fabric. So flipping this over just as we did before. And now we're going to flip it right sides out. So I know the top of my waistband's here, and I can feel the bottom of my waistband here. You can give that a mark, and then marking the center again, and then marking 1 inch away from that seam. My grid ruler is 2 inches wide, so it's helpful. And then following that center line to those 1 inch marks. So I have an actual grommeter for this. If you have a hand tool set, just follow the instructions on the set. The drawstring that I use is a 1/2 inch wide twill tape. So I actually use a 3/8 width grommet. If you're using a wider drawstring, then you can use a wider grommet. You don't want to make sure that you don't want your grommets to be too much bigger than your drawstring, or you're going to see your elastic underneath. So I actually just use my little drill hole tool that you're supposed to use for patterns. It works great for fabric as well. You just have to make sure that you have a hard surface underneath it. So you're just poking 2 little holes. You don't want to make sure that you don't want it to be too much bigger than your grommet, or you're going to have a hole around it. And then you can just poke it through on the right side. Grommets have 2 pieces to them, so they have a front and a back. So you want to make sure that your front is poking through on the front of your fabric. And then they come with this little washer. You can also use eyelets for this too. Eyelets have only 1 piece. And then placing the washer over top of it and giving that a good press. Just like that. So you don't need to poke it through. You can actually put it on there first and then poke your fabric on top. And you're just stretching that hole that you made around the garment. You can also use scissors to make the hole as well, or a leather hole punch works great. And there you go. Now we get to top stitch the rest of our waistband down. So if you like to include fabric tags on your pieces, you can tack those on now. I just tacked them to the edge of my serge where my center back is. So now taking your pins, we're going to flip our waistband over itself, just so it's the width. You'll feel the edge of your elastic, and that is where we're lining it up to, or that is where our fold line will be. And then just making sure that your seams are matching matching to themselves, really. So I like to pin at the center front and then the side seams. So this is what I mean by the seam. I can see this, the edge of the seam right here, and I'm matching it to the edge of my seam allowance right there. I just pin at the 4 spots that we pinned our elastic on when we serged it on, at the center front and center back, and then both side seams. So I like to start again where I started serging on my elastic, between the center back and the side seam. And we're just stretching the elastic so it lays flat. We don't want to stretch it too much or we'll overstretch our waistband. And then I'm just edge stitching right in between the serge. So if you're actually using a 4 thread, you're following that center thread there. Again, those marks on your foot help you know where you're stitching. So I'm lining up that little Sharpie mark that I made to the edge of my serge. Again, using a stitch length 3. When it comes to your pockets, you just want to pull them so they don't shift over too much. Pull them just so they lay flat. And then when you get to where you started, just overlapping it a little bit. Now while you're still at your machine, I'm gonna hem my drawstring. So I use the 1/2 inch twill tape. I just like to fold them over on each other twice, about 1/4 inch each time, and then just top stitch that edge down. You can also knot the ends or use fray check, however you would like to finish it. So now we're going to give our waistband a good press, flipping them right sides out and steaming our elastic. And then giving our side seams a good press. So using my Play-Doh method to roll out your seams. I call it Play-Doh because it's like you're rolling out a long piece into a little snake. And this helps roll that seam right to the edge for a nice press. Now our sweatshorts are done, so if you are using your drawstring, we can thread it through now. Because my eyelets or my grommets are so small, I actually use a bobby pin to help me snake it through. You can also use a safety pin if you do have the room. I just slip it through that little loop that I just made when I hemmed it and thread it through the whole thing. With the bobby pin, it's a little bit trickier because it likes to get caught on to your side seams and then even where you overlapped your elastic. So you just have to maneuver it around those obstacles. Oh, see, I think it's, yep. So see, if it does get caught onto your side seam, just pull it back a little bit. There you go. And then you can actually just lift it out of the way and thread it underneath. There we go. And then once you get to the other side, you should be able to poke it through. And then once you have the other side poked through, you can take that out. And then just do some pulling and shifting to make your waistband or your drawstring fit evenly. And then we're done. And there's your sweat shorts.